How are you guys doing? Today is Thursday, May 13th, 2021, out here in this quarantine. I'm James Sims, and for this episode of The Elite, I'm going to do an individual profile on Tyrann Mathieu, the starting safety for the Kansas City Chiefs, who has had I think for the last decade that he's been in the limelight as a college football player and as a professional football player. He's been one of the most electric, exciting defensive players that the game has ever seen. And with this episode, I'm just going to give a little bit more context into just like the stats, the accolades, and achievements throughout his career up until now. And hopefully, as time goes on, as we come around till this time next year, hopefully he has more to add. But just to give a little bit more background, if you're unfamiliar with Tyrann Mathieu, he was about 5'9" and 190. If you're familiar with the NFL, you're probably aware that most dudes in the NFL are bigger than that, but he's incredibly small, he's incredibly nimble, he's very fast, he's very intelligent, he can ball hawk in the air, he can read quarterbacks' eyes. He does everything that you virtually want a safety to do, and what he makes up for inside, and I would say his intellect in the moment definitely makes up for his lack in size. And considering most DBs are kind of that size, he's not even that small, really, to be honest. But he's originally from New Orleans, Louisiana, coming up out of Louisiana. It's only natural that as one of the top prospects in the state, he would choose to play at LSU. In 2013, this was under Les Miles. Les Miles recruited him. Or I'm sorry, he would get drafted in 2019, but he would play his very first year in 2009 under Les Miles. As a freshman, he would play 13 games in a season where LSU would finish with an 11-2 record. They won the Cotton Bowl with the 8th best record. He would finish with 57 total tackles on the season, 4.5 sacks at the safety position, with 2 interceptions and 5 total forced fumbles, 3 fumble recoveries. So, of course, man was all over the field. And he wouldn't get recognized for what he was doing as a freshman, but he would, of course, would get recognized his sophomore year after putting up an amazing season. In his sophomore season at LSU, he would play 13 games in a season where they ended up winning they ended up losing the national championship game, where they lost it to Alabama, the year where Alabama and LSU played. But regardless, in that season, Mathieu would finish with 76 tackles in those 13 games at the safety position. He had 1.5 sacks, 2 interceptions, just like the previous season. He had 6 forced fumbles for 5 fumble recoveries and 2 fumble recovery touchdowns on the season. So, of course, he was having an incredible year. And following that year at LSU, Tyrann Mathieu would establish himself as one of the best players in the SEC. He would be named first team All-SEC. He was a consensus All-American. He was the SEC Defensive Player of the Year. They won the SEC title that year because I think that's how it went. He was a Heisman Trophy finalist as a defensive player. And he would receive all the trophies necessary. But then after the 2011 season, he would eventually get dismissed from the 2012 season after repeated drug test failures. So he would sit out the entire 2012 season. But following the 2012 season, he would still be recognized as one of the best prospects, one of the best talents in the 2013 draft. Even so, he was picked by the 69th overall pick in the 3rd round of the 2013 draft by the Arizona Cardinals, where, of course, he would make the next jump into his NFL career. In 2013, his age 21 season, he would start 11 of the 13 games that he would play in a for an Arizona Cardinals season where they finished with a 10-6 record, but they completely missed the playoffs. This was under Bruce Arians' first season. In the 13 games that he would play, Mathieu finished with 68 tackles, 2 interceptions, a forced fumble. He also had a sack as well. Not necessarily recognized as a Pro Bowler. He did go on to make the All-Rookie team as he was establishing himself as one of the best young players in his class. His second year at Arizona, he started 6 of the 13 games that he would play in a season where the Cardinals finished with an 11-5 record. They had the second best record in the NFC West. Bruce Arians won Coach of the Year, and they would go on to make the playoffs. In this season, within the 13 games he played, Mathieu finished with about 38 tackles, with no sacks on the season. He had an interception, and he had a fumble recovery. Of course, still in 2014, he would not get named to a Pro Bowl team, but he would go on to make the playoffs for the first time. And once they made the playoffs, they would go on to lose to the Cardinals in the season where the Patriots ended up beating the Seahawks. Just to give a little bit more context as to what season that was. His third season in the NFL was when he started to catch the attention of when he was able to catch the attention of the entire league. In his third season in the league, his age 23 season in 2015, he would start all 14 of the games that he would play in a season where the Cardinals finished with a 13-3 record. They had the best record in the NFC West, and frankly, it was the best record that they have ever put up in their, or I guess it was the most wins that their franchise had ever put up in their franchise history since 1920. So, of course, this is a very big or a very big season for them on that front. In the 14 games that he played, Mathieu finished with 89 tackles, which is tied for the most tackles he'd ever put up in a season. He finished with 5 interceptions, which is the second most interceptions he ever put up in a season. He had an interception, or he had a pick six, and he had a fumble. He had a forced fumble on the season alongside 1 sack. In 2015, he would go on to be named to his very first Pro Bowl in his career, and he would be named to the first team All-Pro for the very first time in his career, being recognized as the second best safety, if not the best safety in the entire NFL. And once they made the playoffs, the Arizona Cardinals would beat the Packers in the divisional playoffs in overtime, and then they would end up losing in the NFC Championship to the Panthers when Cam Newton won his Super Bowl, but they eventually went on to get crushed by the Broncos in Super Bowl 50. Following his first team All NFL appearance, Tyrann Mathieu would come back in 2016 and only played 10 games for the Cardinals. This was a season in which he was placed on injury reserve with a shoulder injury. But in 2016, in the 10 games that he would play, he finished with 35 tackles. He still had a sack, a forced fumble, and an interception. So not as much production as the year before. And that year, the Cardinals would finish with a 7-8-1 record. This is when Larry Fitzgerald won the Walter Payton Man of the Year. But the Cardinals, they had missed the playoffs. They actually haven't made the playoffs since 2015, full disclosure. Following that 2016 season, he would come back to Arizona for his final season on the team. In 2017, this would be the only season in which he started all 16 games for the Cardinals. And this would be a season where they finished with an 8-8 record. So they had, I guess, one more win than the year before, the same, so they took away one tie, so they added a win to that. And in missing the playoffs, and the 16 games he would play, Tyrann Mathieu finished with 78 tackles. Up until then, the second most amount of tackles he put up in a season. He finished with 2 interceptions. He finished with a forced fumble as well. Not much production from the defensive end, but he was still doing what he could, holding it down on his end. He would not get recognized for an award, but following his 5th season in Arizona, he would eventually get signed and picked up. He would sign a 1-year contract with the Houston Texans, and he would play 1 season for the Texans. In 2018, his age 26 season, he would play all 16 games in a season where the Houston Texans finished with an 11-5 record, winning the AFC South, which would give Tyrann Mathieu his 3rd appearance into the playoffs. In the 16 games that he played with Houston, he finished with 89 tackles, which is tied for his first team All-Pro season for the most tackles that he's ever had in a season in his career to date. He had a couple of interceptions without a forced fumble, but he did have a fumble recovery. He did not make an All-Star game for yet another season, but once the Texans made the playoffs, they would end up losing to the Colts in the wild card 21-7. After his 1 season in Houston, he decided to sign a 3-year contract with the Kansas City Chiefs, and the 3rd year is going to be this upcoming season. In the very first year of that 3-year contract, Tyrann Mathieu, in his age 27 season, would play all 16 games for a Kansas City Chiefs team that would end up with a 12-4 record. They won the AFC West. This was the 4th year in a row that the Chiefs had made the playoffs his first year getting there. But in the 16 games he would play, he would not make an all-star game, but he would still be named first team All-Pro. He would finish with 75 tackles on the season, which is the fourth most tackles he put up in a season. He had 4 interceptions, which is the second most interceptions he's ever put up in a season. Not to mention he also had a couple of sacks on the season. Once the Kansas City Chiefs made the playoffs, they would come from behind and beat the Texans 51-31 in the divisional round. They beat the Titans 35-24 when, of course, all they had to do was stop Derrick Henry, and they did a very good job of that. And once they made Super Bowl 54, they ended up beating the San Francisco 49ers 31-20 as Patrick Mahomes was named the Super Bowl MVP the year after he was named the MVP of the NFL. And of course, holding it down on the defensive end from an All-Pro standpoint was of course Tyrann Mathieu. He had a very big Super Bowl game himself, but of course, once he had made it there, he had reached the pinnacle, and also for the second time in his career, he was named one of the best 2 safeties in the entire NFL. Following the season in which he won his championship in 2020, his age 28 season, the most recent season he played, he started all 15 of the games that he would play in a season where the Chiefs finished with a 14-2 record, which I believe is the best record that the Kansas City Chiefs have ever put up in the history of their franchise, winning their division, of course. In the 15 games he played, he finished with 62 tackles, 6 interceptions, which is the most interceptions he's ever put up in a season, with 1 pick six, and not to mention a fumble recovery as well. He would be named to his second ever Pro Bowl, and he would be named to the first team All-Pro for the 3rd time in his NFL career. So of course, following all that, this would lead us to where we are now, because after the 2020 season, they would beat the Browns in the divisional round. They beat the Bills in the AFC Championship, and they would lose to the Buccaneers pretty embarrassingly in Super Bowl 55. But this would lead us to where we are now, as Tyrann Mathieu today turns 29 years old. Right now, it seems as though if you're looking at his career, it looks as though he may still have some amazing football left in him. He's played some amazing football games. He's been a very vital component to a lot of very amazing football teams, and it looks as though for this 2021 calendar year, especially looking forward to this upcoming football season, I do believe that Tyrann Mathieu is an elite football player, an elite athlete in his position, in his sport, and he's been doing so. He's been playing at such an elite level for the past decade, and many people that watch football regularly are aware of his impact on the game, despite the fact that he only has 2 Pro Bowls to show for it. With that said, I want to wish Tyrann Mathieu a happy 29th birthday. Once again, today is Thursday, May 13th, 2021, out here in this quarantine. If you ever get a chance to watch Tyrann Mathieu, he's wearing number 32 with the Kansas City Chiefs. And I want to thank everyone for listening 13 minutes of this piece. Once all of today's matchups and exhibitions are done, I will come back with another episode tomorrow, Friday, May 14th, 2021, out here in this quarantine. Thanks once again for listening to my piece. I hope all is well, and peace out. I'll catch you tomorrow.